domestic violence in general, and then we're going to talk about teen violence, okay? Because there's some basics. You want to pass these around and everybody take one? And here's some bookmarks. Ooh, that's a bright light. And here's some bookmarks. So, this is, I'm the executive director of Safe Alternatives for Everyone, and we're located 2 minutes from here, right on Pujol Street. And if you know where the Boys and Girls Club is, we're literally right next, after that it's Temecula Community Center, and then our building is right next to us. So we have a beautiful brand new building and in prime territory, and that's actually what our building looks like. And we're there as guests of the city of Temecula. So, and we love our building. We've been there about 5 years. Next. This is our mission statement. And a mission statement for an agency tells you the direction of what the agency's for, basically. So it tells you what we do. And it's supposed to be like 1 or 2 sentences, real short, so you can get a good understanding of it. So ours is really simple. It's SAFE is committed to providing services for children, youth, and families who have experienced or at risk of abuse or violence. It's a very broad mission statement on purpose because we wanted to encapsulate anybody that's experiencing a problem, or we think you're at risk of the problem, or you think you're at risk. So that's very broad on purpose. So domestic violence is kind of a complicated matter, and what that means is there's violence in the home of some sort. There's all sorts of legal and penal codes that we don't really, I think, need to talk about today because it gets confusing. But if you're interested, I'd be happy to give you that information at a different time. But it primarily means it's aggressive, controlling, violent behavior between the 2 parental units in the home. Okay? If there's violence between a child and an adult or any other types of violence, there's different penal codes for that. But it's still illegal and someone's still being the victims, but that's a little bit different. So what SAFE does is a whole bunch of different things for families when they come in. And I think I'm on my back, you guys, so I hope I'm okay. Usually, and families come to us lots of different ways. Sometimes they come to us through the teachers at schools. You guys have school resource officers here in Temecula. So we'll get referrals from the school resource officers. Sometimes the families will just see our name somewhere, or they'll call somewhere and they'll hear our name and they'll come themselves. The courts send folks to us, and we do all sorts of different services because every family, think about your own families. Families are very complicated, and they're all different, right? Your family and how you guys deal with dinner and talk to each other is different than your family. It's different from my family. Everybody's different, so everybody needs different kinds of services. And so but unfortunately, domestic violence has some very similarities with it, and we're going to kind of get into that. And it bleeds over into teen violence, because usually that's what happens. Kids see it at home, they start doing the same behaviors with each other, and then they grow up and sometimes have those same issues. So from a domestic violence standpoint, these are all the different things that we do when families come in the door. The first thing we're going to do, whether it's a teenager or an adult person that comes to the door, is we're going to make sure they're immediately safe. So the first thing we're going to do is this a safe phone number to talk to? Are you safe right now? If you're only safe for an hour, how are we going to get a hold of you? So we do a lot of immediate trying to figure out how we're going to deal with your family. Because sometimes people will call and they can only call us for the hour. Or when, and I'm going to say him because primarily most domestic violence is perpetrated by men, but yes, women can be perpetrators as well, but primarily based on statistics, it's male. So, hi there. So primarily what we do when someone calls in first is we want to establish, are they safe right this second? If someone says no, then usually our response is, then we're not the people you should be calling, you should be dialing 911, right? If you're immediately at risk of being hurt, we need law enforcement to come out and help you. And it's very interesting, a lot of people don't want to call the police. A lot. Especially a lot of kids don't. Can you imagine, why do you think people don't want to call the police? Come on,
Maybe
make
they
me
don't see
talk.
it as a big deal.
That's a good one. That's true. What else do you think?
They love their father or their mother.
Absolutely. Another great one. What else?
They're afraid
They're afraid. And what do you think they're afraid of?
getting hurt or damaging their family.
Absolutely. Oh, you guys are so smart. That's all true. And the one that's very interesting, what's your name?
Michael.
Michael. their behavior okay, right? But you still love them. So it's very hard to wrap your brain around calling the police to come to your home, but then you're trying to be safe yourself. So it's complicated. And it's our jobs to kind of help people sift through that, to keep you safe, number one, and to be able to, whatever part of the family is going to remain together if there is violence, that we help that family heal. So it's a long, complicated process, but our immediate need is we want you safe. And if someone's going to hurt you, that means we want you to call the police. There's another reason I've heard from people not call. Well, I don't know if I should, and I'm not sure if, I don't want to bug them. I'm like, bug them? We pay their salaries. They work for us. They're waiting to help you. They're driving around in their little units all over town, right? They're not just out trying to give you a ticket. They're out there waiting to help people. So everywhere we go, I try to get people to think differently, that we need to call law enforcement. It's a help for us. So even teenagers especially, but it's hard. There's no doubt. It's very hard. Another thing that we do for folks is restraining orders, and those are a court process. So if you're in immediate need that you're at risk of being hurt, you call us. It's a form we fill out, and we file it with the court, and it says the person that was threatening to hurt you or has hurt you cannot come in contact with you for a certain period of time. And if they do, you call the police and that person gets arrested. So you can see how it's hard all the way around. So we help you do that. And part of the reason SAFE is here, because if you had all these needs, gosh, think how hard that would be to do that by yourself or ask friends and what happens is it's so hard that a lot of people don't do it. So that's our jobs, is to try and mitigate and help you with all those things. If you're a young mom and you have 4 kids and your husband's the one that's been hurting you and you're not working, that's another reason people don't call, right? Because then what? You have to get out of the house with the kids. If he gets arrested, sometimes he comes home the very next day, and what are you going to do with those 4 kids, right? You end up maybe being homeless, and how are you going to feed them? So it's a burden that we try to help with, all that stuff, because we want people to be safe. So I told you, when people call right away and they're in an emergency situation, if they can't call the police, we try to do that and help them with that, and then help ease through that whole process. We have a little house also that's out in the middle of nowhere, and it's not per se a typical shelter. Does everybody know what a shelter is? It's not a big shelter where lots of people go to live while they're figuring out where they're going to go. It's one home that's been donated. The use has been donated to us, and we put our very high-risk families in there. And those families, and I know it's going to sound kind of like a movie, but we're talking the family we just had in there. Her husband was a military sniper and had weapons and was threatening to shoot her and the children. So that's where we put her, because nobody knows where it is. So that home is saved for a very, very high, and we're usually, she stayed for 4 months, because sometimes it takes a long time to get things figured out. So we help people with, so that's called the confidential placement. Nobody knows where that is, and it's against the law to tell somebody. If you stayed in our safe house and you told somebody where that was at, that's against the law. So otherwise you're jeopardizing everybody's safety if people know, right? We're not hiding it if everybody knows where the house is, right? We also help with basic needs. So let's say your family has this thing happen in your home and you have to be displaced for whatever reason, that you left your clothes, right? You're in school, what are you going to do? You get moved someplace, well, we help you with all that. If you need new clothes, if you need to help with food, we do all those things so that you can feel okay and be safe where you're at. We do safety planning and lethality assessment. And what that means is, if you come in to see us, maybe mom isn't ready to leave, or maybe you're not ready to do something and you feel like you're at risk with your boyfriend or your girlfriend, and you're just not ready to make that step yet, we do what's called a safety plan. So we say, okay, if you're not ready, you don't think it's serious enough to leave, here's what we would like you to do. So if something does happen to you, or you feel threatened and you want to get out, here's how you're going to do it. You have extra house key at a friend's house, you have clothes at a friend's house, money somewhere, all these things, so that if you're an adult, it would be you have your documents, so security cards, money, medication if you're on it. A lot of times, if you have kids with special needs, they'll have medication that needs to be, so all these things we want you to think it through, so when it's time and you're ready to go, you have a plan. Okay? And the lethality assessment is much more serious, and that is we chance that you're not just going to be hurt, but that you're going to be killed. And so when you walk through that with people, it's a long, arduous process, but it helps them to recognize how serious their situation is. When people live with violence in their home, their threshold or what they think is scary gets changed. For example, you might have someone say, oh yeah, we ask, are there weapons in the home? Right? And maybe mom will say, yeah, he's got a few guns in the home. Has he ever pointed those weapons at you? Oh, he does it all the time. But he's never going to do it. And they'll be sharing stories with us, and to us, oh my gosh, we're scared for them, right? Because that's not normal, okay behavior. But to her, it is, because they live with that all the time. See what I'm saying? So what's normal to them and not very scary, to us is very different. But because that's their life, sometimes they normalize that and they minimize how bad that situation might be in their own heads. And that's how they've been able to survive that whole time, right? If you think your life is in danger every day, even though eventually most people will get there, it's very hard to survive that way. So we do all sorts of stuff with our own minds to survive and to live where we're at. And it's a good thing most of the time, but when it comes to violence, not so much. We also have a Police Activities League, and that's our violence prevention program. And that program, we do all sorts of fun stuff with kids, and it's 5 to 18 years old. And the focus of that program is recreational activities. But we also have victim awareness and anger management classes, and those are court-ordered classes. And those are usually for kids, and I know you all know, not you ever participated, about kids that get in fights at school, right? There's a lot of fights in schools. Lots of fights off campus at the start of school. And so those kids get referred to us, and we walk them through a curriculum, court-ordered curriculum that teaches them how to maybe not have that same behavior next time, and teaches them coping mechanisms. So if you feel yourself getting that angry, here's some ways that you can deal with that. And we hope that after those kids take those classes, they're attached to us and they want to hang out and do fun stuff, because we do a lot of fun stuff. I mean, we go in the ocean, we've gone camping, we do all sorts of stuff. We ride quads out in the desert through the National Park Service. And all those programs are designed, number one, to get you out of your environment, for you to meet other children, other kids your age, other kids that you probably wouldn't hang out with in high school. And it just broadens your horizons. We do a lot of stuff about work and job placement, to help you go to college, fill out forms, all sorts of stuff. So we have a leadership program as well that just put on a fundraiser at the Calathon. So we do a lot of stuff. And the whole goal is to give kids good, healthy things to do with law enforcement volunteering, because we really need to instill respect for law enforcement. And over the years, that's really taken a backseat. Because studies show if young people do not respect law enforcement, they're not going to respect you, they're not going to respect you, they're not going to respect their teacher. So what happens if you don't have respect? You break the rules a lot, and a lot of at-risk behavior starts happening. So that's part of what the program is. And we also teach police to respect kids. What a concept, right? Mm-hmm. It goes both ways. And we've seen law enforcement really change their attitude towards young people, because if they're constantly arresting kids or dealing with kids that are doing graffiti, tagging, smoking pot in the parking lot, all the stuff that some kids do, you kind of get a jaded attitude towards kids in general, right? And it's not their jobs, they're not social workers, to figure out maybe why you're acting that way. So all they do is get the front side of it. When they are in the Police Activities League, they get to know you. And they realize sometimes we all do things that on the outside doesn't look like it's very healthy or smart to do, but sometimes we do silly stuff and we're hurting inside. So they get to know the kids as people, and it's really changed their attitude. We've seen a lot of good stuff come from this program. Another thing that we do is court accompaniment. Because all this stuff is complicated and takes a lot of time and scary, we go to court with folks as well. Because if let's use a kid for an example. Let's say you've been hurt by a family member, and there's been charges filed, he's been arrested or she's been arrested, you go to court, and it's scary. So we go with you. We can't sit up with you, and we can't give you legal advice, but we can be there with you, and we can kind of walk you through what's going to happen. It's just a comfort, so you'll know what's going on. So what is domestic violence? Domestic violence is really power and control over somebody. Yes, there comes violence with it, but there's psychological and there's physical. but it really is about one partner controlling somebody else, okay? Down here, from the Missouri Coalition Against Domestic Violence, it's described as a pattern of assaultive and coercive behaviors that adults or adolescents use against their current or former intimate partners. You've all heard of stalking, right? That's got its own set of laws, but sometimes goes hand in hand with this. It's gonna come up now. Go ahead and keep hitting on it. So we know common sense says domestic violence is physical abuse. Everybody pretty much knows that, right? That means hitting, pushing, slapping. There's also sexual abuse. There's verbal and emotional abuse, which is much harder to do any prosecution with, but it's very damaging to your soul and to who you are. So we take that very seriously. Psychological abuse, economic abuse, spiritual abuse, stalking. Now, economic abuse is interesting. It's starting to get a lot of attention. Anybody know what that is or can guess what that is?
Really?
Say again?
Making it so they need you
Need you how?
economically.
See? Exactly. Because what happens if your parents take your allowance away, those of you who have allowance, or you don't work, but you have to buy food? What happens if you don't have any money? You can't buy food. I'm not trying to trick you, I'm just being good. So what happens is if you live in a home where mom is not allowed to work, I don't say doesn't want to, there's a lot of fabulous stay-at-home moms, is not allowed to work, her name isn't on the checkbook, right? He brings home the money she's allowed to have. If you report that person to the police, he gets arrested, what happens to you? You have no money, you have no access to money. And many times that will go all the way throughout even a court process because it takes a court order for that to happen to release money. So economic abuse is huge, and it's part of the reason that people have such a hard time getting out of it. Spiritual abuse, we see that all the time. That the partner, the victim that's being abused wants to go to church, but the perpetrator doesn't believe in that church or doesn't want her to go to church because then he's scared she's going to say something, or it's just another control issue. And it's very hurtful to people that really feel like that's their sanctuary, their safe place, and they can't go to church. Stalking, cyber stalking, and harassment, we're talking about the teenagers even more, because this, unfortunately, is huge with young people. I'm not going to go through all this, but you can all pretty much guess what physical abuse is, right? It can be one of these things, it can be all of these things, it just depends on the person. But a lot of stuff you probably haven't thought about, like reckless driving. We've had many cases where the person driving is threatening to wreck the car, or is driving so erratic that you're scared all the time, right? It's a scary thing to happen. Lock you out, don't let you in. Food deprivation and sleep deprivation is another very common situation. So have you ever, I know you guys, because you're good students, I know, don't have to pull all-nighters, but I'm sure some of you stayed up really late for tests, right? And when you have sleep deprivation, a lot of things happen to your body anyway, but it just makes your decision-making very difficult and not good, right? On top of all the other stuff that's happening to your brain. And so attacking with weapons, of course, the absolute worst. And we've had a few here in the past few years, murder. Now, sexual abuse, if a couple's married, and a lot of people don't understand this, that is rape. Just because you're married to somebody, if you want to have sex with someone they don't want to, it's still considered rape, even if it's a married couple. There's name calling, same thing we're talking about, demanding sex when it's unwanted, ways that it's unwanted, denying use of contraception. That's a very common thing with teens as well, and with partners together, because sometimes if the female gets pregnant, you're tied to that person, right? Because now you have a child together. Withholding sex and affection as punishment. Another one that is very, very common, and we're on the verbal emotional abuse, which can take tons of different things, is hurting pets. We have a lot of people threaten to hurt pets and do hurt pets. That's why when we see young children that are very rough with pets and hurt pets, we really are wanting those kids to get evaluated. Emotional abuse, to be honest with you, with all the clients I've seen, I'm old, I've been doing this for 30 years, they can tell you all their horrific things physically that's happened to them, enough that sometimes I have a hard time sleeping at night. But this, I will tell you, is some of the most damaging that can happen to any of us. And I think, too, too, if you're in a relationship and you have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, and they're telling you you're stupid every day, or what your outfit you have on is ugly every day, or that you're not very smart, if you hear that all the time, what do you think happens?
You start believing it.
You absolutely start believing it. And it's the same for teenagers or adults. If your environment every day is telling you you're not enough, you're this, you're stupid, you're this, which is degrading, it's hard not to take that to heart when someone you love is telling you these things, right? Because the people that we love are supposed to care for us and protect us. But it happens very slowly sometimes, and sometimes you don't even realize it, that that's what's happening. So it's very important that we understand that no one deserves to be taught like that, ever, from anybody. And if they do, that's a very unhealthy relationship. Okay, next. This is kind of some of the same different things, but one of the things we see, if you look at all these things, can you read or mind your way? What do you think is the most common? There's mind games, killing pets or hurting them, abusing children, property damage, undercutting victims' sense of reality. That's a whole other topic. I don't want to spend too much time here because we have teen stuff. What do you think is the most common on that one?
Property damage.
It is. You just get an A over here. It totally is. We spend more money fixing people's doors and windows, garage doors, inside the home. Because, you know, what would you guys do if you're sitting here talking to me and I'm mad, right? You know I'm mad. And I pick something up and I throw something and hit it against the wall right behind your head. That is horrific. You are so scared. So it tells you, okay, he's going to throw that at my head. What's he going to do next, right? So it's a very scary feeling for people and for kids. And, you know, there's always all these cartoons. Remember all the cartoons about moms throwing shoes? I don't know. I think you guys are probably too young. But they used to be kind of a funny thing about hitting people with frying pans, just some of the jokes and flying shoes. And those kinds of things used to be played off like it's not a big deal. It is a big deal. People hurt or throw things or destroy property when they're angry. We're worried that it's going to turn into something else to a person. I'm not saying it always does, but that's what the fear is. So when we talk to people, remember I told you about that threat assessment? We ask them so many questions, and sometimes people don't understand, but we ask, have you had things thrown at you? All those types of things, and all these kind of weird, and people don't get it until you get done with the assessment, and it prints out this nice little form and tells you all this thing, and it paints a picture of this is an extremely dangerous situation, or, believe it or not, they make it a rating. But when someone gets that in their hand and they read it and has his name and her name on it, it's so different than me saying, I'm scared for you. Because what I'm hearing is this and this and this. For some reason, it just kind of seals the deal. And many a time, we do two different types of threat assessments. One's called a mosaic, which is pretty heavy, but it helps people make a decision if they need help or not. Computer, stalking, cyber stalking, harassment. This is where teenagers come in a lot. Because you guys are raised on this. We weren't. And texting. And you know, moms and dads aren't the brightest about catching this stuff because that wasn't our world. It is now, but it wasn't. And I've heard so many moms say, well, he does text her like 10 times an hour. He just really likes her. Now, 10 times an hour to you guys doesn't sound like much. I know because you all do it. But when the texts are, where are you? Who are you talking to? When are you going to be back? What do you have on? Da, 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 da. Those are very controlling behaviors. I don't want you to talk to him. What are you doing right now? Don't go to sleep. We've had cases where there were thousands of texts in one day. That's not healthy and it's not normal to be that controlling of your partner. And many moms would know it because at the beginning it feels like it's kind of fun if you're in a new relationship and the guy's texting you 5 times and says, oh, you look so pretty today, all these things. At first it feels good, but over time that changes. But what happens with that is over time it kind of eats away at you and you don't realize it because it's such a subtle shift until you tell somebody or you get these angry, mean texts because you didn't get back to him fast enough. So a lot of this stalking and abuse with the social media is really out of hand at this point. You all know, you've heard all the bullying that goes on with social media. Now, we do screenshots and we tell you do not erase your texts. even though they might be hurtful and you might not want to look at it again, we beg you not to, because that's evidence in cases. So you always show them to us, and then we save them and use them against the person in court. A lot of times they will just not talk to you, but show up in places. Especially if there's a restraining order. Restraining orders say how close you can be and in what proximity you can be to somebody, and they're very specific to different people. Sometimes they'll say you can't pick up kids at their school. Sometimes it says 200 yards. So what'll he do? He'll be 300 yards, but you'll see him. So what do you think the effect of that is? It's the same, right? You see him, so you're still scared. So that's very common. Monitoring computer use, you know, there's all sorts of programs, and Mr. Kelly knows way more about that than I do, but there's so many programs that can go on computers and cell phones that they can actually get control of your cell phone and see who you're calling and what digits. So we do a lot of stuff around folks. We give them phones. We do all sorts of stuff to make sure that they're not being followed. Number one, if there's no GPS on her places. And a long time ago, we go, how the heck did he know where she was at? Well, now we know. Okay, next. So we're going to skip this. So this is called the good old-fashioned power and control whip, but I want to keep going because there's one for kids. So you get an idea of what domestic violence is, right? Go ahead and run it. Go to the next one. Next. So everybody asks the $100,000 question, why don't they leave? Why do you think moms sometimes primarily don't leave when she's being hurt in her home, or her kids are too? What do you think some of the reasons are? You said a couple. Fear, right? They're scared. But why would you be scared? If you leave,
What they can do to you if you leave.
you know, the most serious injuries and most murders occur in that window when people leave. Because that's when it dawns on the abuser that I'm so out of control now, right? He wants control. He wants to know where you're at, what you're doing, who you're talking to, where you're shopping, what time you'll be home. He looks on the odometer of your car. Feel the oppression and the scrutiny on everything you're doing. And if you were to leave, that sends them into a panic. And that's when many people are murdered. Remember I said safety plans? That's why we do safety plans. We don't want her to have an episode at home and just up and leave without thinking it through. We want you to think, okay, you know he's abusive, or she, right? You know this. You know it, you're here, you've asked us for help, and you know it. So let's make a plan. So if something happens that you know you can't live with, stick to the plan. Because we want her to be safe, the kids to be safe, or him to be safe. Make sense? Kind of sounds weird. I've had students, when we do teen groups, say, what, safety plan? It sounds so dumb. You're living in an abusive environment, we're going to make a plan so one day when you can get out. But it's not dumb at all, because when you understand the psychology behind it, she's not ready, and if she's not ready, she's going to get hurt. And there's reasons why people, so we want to honor when they're ready, because it has to be her decision. If I say you need to get out, but you're kind of waffling and you're not ready, you're probably not going to do it well. And then you're putting yourself and kids at risk. So it's got to be the decision of the person coming for help. It can't be ours. As much as we'd love to scoop everybody up and protect them, we cannot do that. They also feel guilty. Remember we talked about your parents and you love them? There's a guilt factor that you're tearing your family apart, right? If I call the police on my dad or my mom, you feel guilty about that. And kids primarily carry that guilt for a long time. It's never anybody else's fault except for the person perpetrating the violence. It's a choice we all make. Now there are mitigating factors around that too, but that's another presentation. Culture has some to do with it in many different places. Social norms. They love, just like you said. Just because someone hurt you, there was love there. That's why they got married or they're together to begin with. So we can't neglect that and not deal with that because that's real. Options. That's probably one of the biggest ones. If and when someone finally decides not to do it, what are my options? Because I don't want to be homeless, I have 3 kids. Or I'm just scared. So if you don't have anybody to help you, it's a very, very scary thing. Kids. A lot of parents think that he's not hurting the kids, so I'm going to stay so they can have a roof over their head and food. That kind of is logical, I think. I mean, I can understand that thinking, right? But when you tell, and they always tell me that the kids don't The kids always know. Always. They might not know to the degree of what's happening. They might not know all of it, but they always know. And they might not be old enough to articulate it, but they know because they hear screaming, mom's depressed, mom's sad, dad's angry. They always know. And none of that is healthy for a developing kid. And we already talked about lack of support. And in society, we tend to blame the victim a lot. Because what happens that's always so, and I hear so many victims tell us that, well, he hurt us, and I have to leave the house, pack my kids up, have no money, have no food, and he's in jail, going to come home to the house. Right? And then they start asking her questions, well, what did you do? Why did you say that? I mean, in the olden days, even before my time, it was very different. Police would say to women, well, why'd you say that? If you wouldn't have said that, he wouldn't have hit you. You should have had dinner on the table on time. He's mad because you said you'd have dinner at 5 and you didn't. So, if you'd have did it, he wouldn't hit you. So whose fault is that? From the policeman's standpoint, a long time ago, it was her fault. So just get dinner on the table. You don't have to call me and quit bugging me. I guarantee that we have the best law enforcement in Temecula area. They're very well educated because I do a lot of it. And we have very little of that. Every once in a while they'll eke out something, but we all make mistakes. But that primarily in this area is different. Isolation. Same thing teens do. Teen will say, you can't talk to any boys. You can only talk to me. And I don't want you to go there. I want you to stay here with me. And then they kind of start losing their friends. So you guys have friends that have kind of changed when they have a relationship with somebody that might not be the healthiest. They kind of don't hang out with the same friends anymore. Their grades start dipping. There's all sorts of triggers that we can watch, or symptoms that we watch with teenagers that we know something's going on. And then flat out denying, which we already talked about. Immigration status is another one. Many of the perpetrators have been married to someone that's not a citizen. They'll say, if you call the police, they're going to take you away, and they're going to deport you, and I'm keeping the kids. That's not true. So we have lots of people in place to do that. Shame and blame, that kind of goes across the board for all ages, that you feel like it's your fault, because he's told you it's your fault, or she's told you it's your fault, so you start to internalize that. Okay, so here's the numbers, and these numbers are scary. 1 in 3 young adults between 14 and 20, and that's you guys, right? 1 in 3 have experienced some sort of dating violence. I'm not saying that it's necessarily been punched in the face, but there's been some form of dating violence in 1 out of 3 young people. Depends on who you looked at, but most people say young women, but it's about 1 in 7 men, young teenagers. So we did a workshop in Marietta with their leadership council for like 4 hours. It was so fabulous. And these are just some of the things that they said about teen dating violence. And it was a very successful workshop. And do you remember when the football player in Marietta, remember the whole situation out there? Several of them were arrested for rape. They hired us after this incident because they really knew they needed to take a look at what they were doing with young people in schools and what messages were being, and how they were going to deal with that, because it was very traumatic for everybody involved. We've actually had quite a few cases in the schools. We've had a lot of kids. We just had a really serious case in a high school where the student was being sexually violent to the teacher. So, I mean, us adults, we talk a good game, and we sometimes, like, I can stand up here and tell you how to behave and what you should do when there's an emergency, but when it's you, it's a whole different ballgame. And this teacher was a smart cookie, and she just didn't deal with it. And it actually got to the point where I was fearful for her life from this kid. So anyway, we dealt with it, and he is no longer in school. But the problem is this. So here you have this teenager, for whatever reason, was going along this path, right, of being violent to people. He gets expelled from school because you can't have him in school threatening people. And it turns out he did a lot of stuff to other students as well. But you know why? Nobody told. Not one person came forward, and there were a lot of victims in the school. They were scared of him. They were more scared of him than thinking that someone would help. Because, we get in our own heads. Don't you ever have a problem with a friend or a teacher, and it's just, it kind of consumes you. You think it's just the whole world, because that's your world right now. But you gotta step outside of that a little bit. No, there's so many people that are willing to help you. There really are, but it's scary and it's hard, and this kid had everybody scared. Even the teacher was scared. So don't you think the students that were getting traumatized saw that she was, and she was scared? So as a kid, that would make me think, oh my gosh, where am I gonna go to get help if she can't even deal with it? But that's how traumatic it is when people are that angry and mean.
So you only found that out afterwards, that there were kids involved?
Right, she reported it finally, because he actually overtly did something in class. Over time, you get more brazen, right? He's done all this stuff and no one's done it. And actually, he did get in trouble a couple times, because I got the whole thing, and they just didn't do anything. Because nobody knows what to do. It's not that people don't care. Schools and people are ill-equipped to deal when you have this kind of incident. And they wait too long normally to deal with it because they're scared what are they going to do with a student that's perpetrated. When many times these kids could have intervention. They really could. And with this kid, they waited way too long. He aged out. He turned 18. So by the time the case came forward, he was an adult. You know what? He got prosecuted as an adult. And had we looked at that whole scenario, which is what I always do, there were signs that he was having challenges when he was 12, which is normally the case. When you see kids that are bullies or people that are being mean, really mean, fighting a lot, very rarely, by the time it gets to an adult's attention in a big way, is that the beginning of it. It's normally when you go back over time and you ask the parents, they'll tell you, oh my gosh, he's been in trouble at school since he was 5. And so then you go back and look at the records and you watch it progress and escalate, and people just don't know what to do with them. Or they do all sorts of stuff, but none of it gets to the root problem, which is violence at home. Because that's not a teacher's job. Teacher's jobs are to teach you, right? And if you're having a hard time at school, they try to help you. But that's not their job, is to get into your family business. So that's what happens a lot. So look how low the percentage is. So when we work with youth, we always wonder why youth don't get help. This is 3% will tell an authority figure. That is so low. And it goes into the story I just told you, right? Nobody told on this young man who was hurting people. 6% will tell a family member. And you hear it from parents all the time. But I'm close with my daughter. We talk all the time, and she never told me. They don't. They don't tell you because they're ashamed. They feel guilty. They're scared. All sorts of stuff. And it's no indication of the relationship with their family. But really, we should tell our parents. And I'm a parent. Sometimes we overreact. I feel guilty. My daughter still is 28, married with a baby, still tells a story. We were down here for 6 months because she got in a car with a boy and she wasn't allowed to. Yeah, Emma took her computer and I did that. Yeah, it was bad. But she never did it again. But it is because sometimes you're worried about how your mom and dad are going to react. Is your dad going to go crazy and go to school and do something to the other man? Is your mom going to go? We understand all that, but the bottom line is they want to help you and they will help you, and that's what we're here for as well. But look at the number down here, and I know it doesn't surprise any of you guys, right? You're going to tell one of your friends, right? And what would you do if one of your friends told you that her boyfriend was abusing her? What do you think you would do? Be honest.
I would be scared for her too.
Right. So do you think you would do something, or you would just be her confidant? You don't think you'd tell anybody?
I would try, but I would be scared too.
And why do you think you wouldn't tell besides being scared? What's a reason why you wouldn't tell somebody if your friend of yours came to you?
I trusted you in the first place, so it's kind of hard.
She told you not to.
And she trusts you, right? So what, and if you tell somebody, is your friendship going to get ruined? Maybe, and those are hard choices we have to make as kids, as adults. But I always tell kids, if it feels wrong and you know it's wrong, you just have to step up, because the worst thing that can happen is she can get really hurt, she could die, and then how would you feel? Worse, right? It would be worse to have someone get injured or die because you were trying to maintain a friendship and trust that, she had trust in you. But there are worse things that can happen. But it's tough, I'm telling you. I know adults that can't do it. So I think sometimes we expect kids to do things that even us as adults don't do. We put more expectations on you because we worry about you. That's our but it's hard. Adults don't do that many times either. Will you go back for a minute, Rhonda? Oh, I'm sorry. So the bottom line is, you know what these statistics tell us? Well, it tells me, I don't know if it tells everybody else. Quit trying to get them to tell an authority figure, and quit trying to teach people to tell a family member, because it doesn't work. We've been doing it forever, right? Don't we always tell you guys that something don't tell an authority member? You know to go to cops, you know to go to your parents, and you still don't do it. What's that saying about insanity when you keep doing the same thing over, but you expect a different result? Adults do that too when we teach, when we work with kids. We do, and you think we're all college-educated, smart people, but we keep doing the same thing. So I say, why don't we just focus down here? Because this is where it's happening, right? This is what's going to fix problems. It's kind of why you guys are here, right? Isn't that why you're on this task force? Because your peers, your teams, you're out in the community, you're going to be leaders with your groups, and that's what, this is where we need to be spending time and money. But the question is how to do it. That's the number one thing. Do a bunch of you guys want to come to if I put out a flyer, you saw my picture, and I said, hey, come for free, you want to come talk to Melissa about teen dating violence? Be honest, how many people would want to come? None of you. I wouldn't either. You listen to adults all day in school. So we really have to do this differently, and we have to do it with kids. We need you to come forward and do what I'm doing right now, and to be educated and be trained as peer leaders and to be peer trainers, and that's what we did at Marietta. So then we did the training, we stepped out, and we let the kids deliver the information, and man, was it good. And kids came, they kept doing things after, and that was our goal, is for them not to need us anymore. You don't need any more adults talking to you. We had teenagers stand up here and tell their story. That you can relate to, right? Me telling you what's happened to me when I was 16 is unrelatable. It was a long time ago, and I'm not going to tell you how long. But that's where we need to spend time and energy, and that's why young people, to me, are the solution. Because domestic violence is at the core of almost every social problem we have. If you go into death row, you know 97% of those people on death row were abused and had domestic violence in their homes. Think about it. If you grow up in an environment like that, you have a higher risk of suicide, drug and alcohol abuse, mental health issues. It affects everything. You're going to go to school unhappy, not feeling good, fight with your friends, because home isn't a good place for you. And when home's not a good place for you, life sucks, right? So this is what we need to do on top of prevention altogether. Okay, what time is it? I need it.
It's about 10 to 6.
Okay. I kind of went through all this, and I can certainly send you guys all this stuff, and we've talked about just constant vigilance on you. Keep going. So one thing I want to tell you about is, besides our office, and we're in Old Town, we have another office called the Southwest Family Justice Center, and that's a cool place. And we designed it so that if someone comes in and needs help, they don't have to go to SAFE, they don't have to go to police separately, they don't have to go to a food pantry, they don't have to do all these different stops. They get to come here, and we wrap all the services around them right there. We have a policeman that can come take the report. I have a nurse I can call out in case there's been an injury that's not, that you don't have to go to the ER for. We feed the kids, we do all sorts of stuff, and it's all in one place. And we do teen services there as well. But SAFE is right up the street, so we can do that. One quick thing I wanted to tell you about too is, and it's really complicated, and I do a whole presentation on brain chemistry with violence, but you know sometimes you have a friend that's really upset, they're crying hysterically, or I'm being very role specific and judgmental on this, but guys get mad and hit things, and they're acting out, their decision making is kind of crazy, and you're worried they're going to do something crazier. There's a reason for that, and there's a logical reason, because when you're scared, there's all sorts of chemical changes that happen in your brain. You know when you're scared, that good old fight, flight, you know that whole, you guys have learned all about that? Mm-hmm. Well, that's because your body gets flooded with chemicals, adrenaline, all sorts of stuff, and it's complicated. But that's what your body does. So you're ready, right? You're going to fight whatever's happening to you, or you're going to run and get out. And that's how your body takes care of itself to get you out of danger. And what happens with people that live in families with violence, if you're scared all the time, and I'm talking about young people, and you get that, you have those fight or flight hormones going, right? If you have that a lot and you live in a home where that happens frequently, like you're scared, you have to be careful. Kids that have that all the time, brain chemistry changes. And when you're scared and you've been hurt, you don't make good decisions because there's so much going on physically. So we expect people not to make good decisions at that time. And that's why sometimes when people are hysterical when they've been hurt, that's why. Because your body and your brain is going through all sorts of stuff, and if you can't sort and make a decision, and that's why you need help. And that's why people don't want you to make a decision when you're upset, right? Because you have stuff going on in your brain that you don't even know about. So in kids that we know, there's been many brain scans done on kids that have been exposed to violence at a very early age. They did a research study where the kid's brain was compared to a soldier's brain who saw combat. Think of it. Think of an officer. I'm wrong costume. Think of a soldier in a war. They come home and they have what you all hear PTSD, right? They compared the brains of kids that lived in violent homes to the brains of those soldiers, and they reacted the same way with stimuli, with pictures. So they would show them different pictures, and the same parts of their brain would react. And so those kids were reacting. Those are the kind of kids you see at school, and we try to teach teachers this. Those are the kids that when you're lining up to go somewhere and somebody bumps them, they elbow somebody or they pop somebody because they're very reactive because their bodies are on edge all the time because stuff happens to them. So it makes sense that they would be on edge, right? And so we have to learn how to deal with these kids in programs so that we don't put them in situations to react. They're hyper vigilant. We have a lot of kids will have activities, and we'll have kids that will, where's my sister? Where's my brother? They know where the door is. They're nervous. They can't pay attention. They can't task because they have all these hormones going through their bodies that don't let them relax. When you have a fight or flight response when you're scared, then you have a letdown response. Oh, it's over, right? You kind of feel exhausted. You're tired. A lot of these kids and families don't get that letdown enough or long enough. And if you have that cycle happening to you all the time, they've seen permanent brain changes. And so these kids have all sorts of deficits now. They can't learn the same. Now, a lot of this can be dealt with and fixed with positive programming. But there's all sorts of physical reasons why we want to help people that have been exposed to violence or trauma and live in these situations. Not only is it horrific for the person, but we also know that sometimes there's long-term problems that are associated with that. And we want kids to be successful at school. So these kids have a hard time at home and they go to school and they can't focus. Their stomach hurts. They're just not in a good place. So then they don't have a good experience at school either. So where is it that they can have a safe place? So it's important that we get folks, and it's important as team leaders, I think, in the community, that you guys understand this. So that if you're, faced with this situation, that you can step up and help somebody, or at least get them somewhere. You can always call us. Okay? I know it's a happy subject, right? Any questions?
Well, how can we use this in our day-to-day lives?
I don't know. You tell me. That's a great question. Or ask your counterparts. I can give you like 80 things that you have to work on. How do you think you can use this in your day-to-day lives? Come on. Well, I think we already talked about it. If someone tells you something, right?
See something, say something.
If you see something, say something. I remember my daughter came home. She went to Temecula Valley High School. She was 17. She came home and saw a young man grab his girlfriend's head and shoved her head against the locker. She was so traumatized. Now, this is a young woman who's been raised in a home with a mother who's been a social worker for many, many years, and she didn't do anything. She didn't know what to do. Because you know what your own parents, when they nag at you constantly, you kind of tune this out. It's a natural thing to do. She didn't do anything. But, I shouldn't say that. She didn't do anything in the moment. She did later, because I said, wow, all the stuff that we've talked about, what do you think you could have done? But she was scared. She was scared if she were to intervene, which I wouldn't have wanted her to do. I wanted her to tell somebody. She was scared that if she intervened, he would hurt her, which I would not recommend. 2, she was scared to tell because she thought the girl would be mad at her, and she was scared of the crowd he hung out with. All those are real things for kids, and that's why sometimes you have to elicit the help of adults who can help you sort through that. If you don't want to tell your parents, if you don't want to tell your teachers because you know they're going to do something, you're not ready for that, you can always tell us. By law, unless we feel there's a threat that you're gonna hurt yourself or you're gonna hurt somebody else. So if there's a suicide, if we feel that you really might commit suicide or attempt, we are gonna report it and get you some help. But if you just wanna talk about an incident that happened, you saw it, and you're not sure what to do, you can always call us and we'll help, we'll just talk to you. I always tell people when they call, I'm not sure if I should call or not. The fact that you did tells me, yes, you needed to call. It doesn't mean we're gonna do anything, it just means you need to talk it out somewhere. That's what we're here for. It's just like cops, that's what we're paid for. So take advantage of it. I don't mean call cops every time on silly stuff, but you know what I mean. But that's what we're all here for, is to help people. And for us to not, when you know it, and not to call would make me sad, because there's lots of resources out there. And your teachers, and your counselors know who we are. So in your day-to-day life, I think you can kind of look at things a little different. Now that you've been a little educated, if you see some relationship that you think he's a little bit over the top, you might want to be nice and lovingly tell your friend, gosh, seems like he's pretty intense. Are you okay with that? And start the dialogue. Having the conversation. Going back to your groups. We have young people that can come talk to groups too. We're always looking to recruit new people that want to help us do that. Because like I said, it's much better coming from kids. So just knowing stuff and be able to share it with your friends and volunteering places to